Hello. Welcome to ShePropTalk. I'm Beverly from Downen Creative Studios, and today I have with me again the wonderful Abby Cat Cosplay. And today is a very special episode.
We're answering questions that were placed on the SheProp community forum that you were wanting to know about sewing.
Yes, and quite frankly, Abby's going to be answering most of these questions because I am still very much a beginner. No matter what anyone says, I still feel like I have a lot to learn, especially with some of these questions that some of the ladies posted that they want to have answered. I was like, oh, I've got to look that up. I don't even know what that is. So I'm excited that you're here so that I can take advantage of your big brain and ask you all the questions as well. So,
thank you for having me.
Disclaimer though, there's a lot of questions that were posted. We're going to cover just a few of them because we only have a certain amount of time before you guys get bored and stop listening. So, so we're going to answer a few and then look forward to having more of these kinds of episodes with other makers. And Abby's going to come back and do this again with me. So definitely look forward to that. So, cool. All right.
I didn't know I was going to come back until just now. So
well, yes.
Okay.
I'm volunteering you.
You're voluntolding me.
I'm voluntolding you. Yes.
Okay. I don't mind. It's fine. I'll do it.
Mandatory volunteering. There's like some word for that, which I thought was hilarious, but not today. Yay! All right, let's get started. So, what's first on our question list?
The first question was, how do you get machines to stop eating your fabric? And yes. I actually have a trick. This is because when I started sewing, I actually started as a quilter and not as a clothing maker or a costume maker. And in quilting, they call it chaining. And what you do is you take your piece and you feed it through, and you don't cut your thread. You just take the next piece and feed it through straight after in a big long chain. Works great when it comes to quilting.
Yeah.
What you do when you're quilting and you're chaining is you actually use a little chunk of scrap fabric, and when you get to the end of your chain, you just feed that little chunk in, and you leave it there under the pressure foot. And then when you start again, you sew through that little chunk, and then you start sewing your piece. So what this does is it means that your thread is already engaged, so you don't have that big long chain, so you actually save thread this way. And also when you are oftentimes when your machine eats your fabric, it's because it catches the tip of it into the little hole.
Okay.
I don't know the technical term. We'll call it a little hole. You know what I'm talking about.
We all know what hole you're talking about, Abby.
But it makes it so that you can kind of pull on your little chunk of fabric a little bit, and so it keeps the momentum going, and you don't get your tip stuck in the little hole.
That's a great tip. Sorry, I'm putting my sweatshirt back on.
No, it's okay.
It's kind
what
of
I can do is I can videotape myself doing this.
Okay.
And then we can share that. Because it's really easy. You can just take a scrap right out of your garbage can and just like leave it, which I've done before.
Oh yeah, I've gone dumpster diving in my own trash for scraps.
Also make great hankies.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my gosh. So funny.
But so it's just a really quick and easy thing. I'm sure there are people who know much more about sewing machines that can give you a more technical way of doing that. But because it just keeps that momentum going, it doesn't let your needle just poke your fabric down into that hole. And you
still want to do a back stitch and then keep going. Like you don't do, because you're going to need to have that reinforced. You're just going to be snipping the ends, or just
you're just cutting the little bit of thread between your spacer piece and what you're actually sewing.
That's a really great tip.
And you can just reuse that little square of fabric until it's solid thread.
Yeah. And sometimes I, at the ends of whatever I'm sewing, if I do a back stitch, it'll get like all clumped up inside. So how do you fix that? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like it just becomes like a big ball, and then I've got to like wrestle with the fabric to get it out of my machine.
Yes, there's a solution for that. It's an alternative to a back stitch. Mm-hmm. It's not my preferred method because I find that this way kind of interferes with my rhythm. But instead of back stitching, you can also go to the end of your whatever you're sewing and turn your stitch length down to just 1 or half.
Oh, okay.
So just at the end, it's just these teeny tiny little stitches, and those aren't going to come out, but you don't have that like clumped up stitch
ball of thread getting stuck in there. That's a great
tip. So you can just tighten that stitch, or not tighten it, shorten it a lot.
I like that. On my machine, I have a feature where you can and again, I'm really sorry, you guys, I don't have technical terms. I'm learning. So, but I can set it so that it'll just stay in place, and I'll just do a couple of stitches with the needle right in place. So I can do that at the end of a dart, or I can do that at the end of a tricky material, so I don't have to go back, which helped me out a lot with the vinyl that I was sewing for Wasp, and also some of the other materials. But then I still found that sometimes the thread would get all gummed up underneath, and I don't know why that was happening, but
and I honestly don't have an easy solution for that, because there can be a lot of different reasons. One of them is not having your sewing machine serviced in a timely manner.
Yeah, so my machines were kind of new machines, but after that project, I definitely need to get it serviced. Actually, I don't know that we have that on our list, but can I ask you about that? How often should you be servicing your machine?
I try to service my machine at least once a year.
Okay.
Depending on how much you sew and what you're sewing on, you could need it more than that.
Okay.
So if you're using fabrics that create a lot of fuzz, like fleeces or furry fabrics or cuddle fabrics, then you may want a good cleaning out earlier than that. Or if you just sew a lot, you may want it cleaned out earlier than that. But at least once a year. In our area, Montevilla Sewing Center is where I go. They're fantastic and very reasonably priced. I have no resources for anywhere other than Portland.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
How much does it cost there?
About $120.
Okay.
But if you think about it, that's less than a new sewing machine.
Yeah. And on these expensive sewing machines, you really want to maintain it so that it stays your friend. And then the last thing you want is for your machine to start acting up, and then you ruin that material that you spent $120 on.
Yes, exactly. And my machine isn't even that expensive. I've had my machine for a good 20 years or so, and I spent less than $300 on it when I originally bought it.
Oh my God.
Because I was poor and in high school.
Yeah.
But if you take care of it, something like a $300 machine is going to last a very long time. And some of that you can do yourself. You can oil your machine yourself. You can take the plates off and dust it out, and you can do those things yourself, and that kind of maintenance will keep it going. I always know that I need to get my machine serviced when my zigzag starts being weird.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I don't know if that's across the board, but that's with my machine. If my zigzag starts skipping stitches, then it's time.
Interesting. I really put my two machines through the ringer with Wasp because I was sewing through a lot of multiple layers of thick fabrics, vinyls. I was top stitching a ton. I was doing crazy stuff with the different zipper foots and doing weird things. So I think I probably need to bring them both in because occasionally one would not act correctly, or it would start skipping stitches.
Yeah.
And then I'd be like, you know what? F this. I'm gonna move on to the other machine that I have set up. So I had both of my machines set up so that if one started acting up, I would move on to the other one, just because I didn't have time to bring my machine. Yeah. So I'm gonna go do that. At least start with one for $120, and then maybe in a few months get the other one done as I replenish my bank account.
And I absolutely know that sometimes letting them out of your sight for a while can be hard, especially if you sew all the time.
Yeah.
I have had an experience where my machine broke a week before Comic-Con.
Oh.
And broke. And it was a 3-day weekend, so my Montevilla Sewing Center was closed.
Oh.
And I had to call my mom crying and tell her that I was coming over. Give me your machine. And she's like,
was this last year?
No, this was, I think I was working on my Queen of Hearts.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah,
that would have been a couple years ago.
Somebody was looking for a machine. I was like, you can come over and borrow mine. I'm not using it right now. Anyway.
I needed a satin stitch. I needed to borrow somebody's satin stitch because my machine doesn't do it. Because I spent $300 20 years ago on it. Yeah. It's not fancy.
Oh. Yeah, you can spend a lot of money on machines, but you don't have to.
You don't.
Just get it serviced.
Because you get it serviced. Yeah. It's worth it.
Yeah.
And they have these fancy things called sewing machine feet, which
Oh, yeah.
are fantastic.
All right.
So that was actually the next element.
Yeah, let's talk about this. So I think I mentioned in a prior podcast, or in the one that I just posted probably, that Abby is my sewing guru. Heather is as well. Heather Robb from the Feathered Heart Cosplay and Props. Anytime, especially when I was making Wasp, I had a lot of questions like, what kind of foot do I use for this? And what's a zipper foot? And what the heck is this? So I learned a lot with this machine. It is okay to ask questions. I have yet to run into someone that won't help me like immensely with sewing questions, especially when it comes to sewing feet. Also at the Montevilla Center or any sewing center, all I had to do was just tell them what I was sewing, and then they were like, yeah, this is what you need. Yeah, they're happy to sell you stuff because usually those feet are kind of expensive sometimes.
Well, and also that one time I called my mom crying. When I did go in, they fixed my machine while I waited, and all it needed was a new $7 part.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which was great. And I wanted to jump across that counter and kiss that tech right in the face, but I didn't because that is harassment.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so some of the most popular sewing machine feet that get used a lot, especially in cosplay, this is one of them. This is called a walker foot. It looks really big, but what it does is it essentially helps really thick, bulky fabric get fed through your machine easily. Now, you can use it on anything. You don't have to use it on bulky fabric. I know some people just never take this foot off if they can help it. But, for example, with this guy, this jacket is made out of... Okay, just a minute.
So for people that are listening,
there we go.
This is the Wicked Witch.
This is my steampunk Wicked Witch jacket, which was made out of fabric that was not intended for clothing use. And there are several points here where I have multiple layers of this, and then you have another little tab sewn on, so you've got multiple layers on multiple layers of stuff that's not intended for fabric.
And this is a vinyl we're talking about.
Vinyl.
Yeah.
Layered with another vinyl, so with more vinyl in between it. Yeah. So it gets really bulky really fast. And getting this through a machine easily, it can chew up your fabric, or it just doesn't go anywhere, or your needle breaks.
Stuck. Yeah.
It just gums it all up. These walker feet really help with that. They're a little bit of, they're kind of noisy, but when you attach it, essentially it just adds another little piece of walker feet, except on the top.
Okay, so in your sewing machine, you've got like the feed dogs on the bottom.
Yes.
And those are the things that kind of like push the fabric through. So on vinyl, when you're sewing that, you've got the vinyl side probably up most of the time, like if you're doing a top stitch or whatever.
If you're doing a top stitch.
It won't slide along very easily. So this has a feed dog basically essentially on the top as well. So they work together, to kind of push that fabric through.
It's pretty handy, especially for the thick fabric.
Yeah, those are a little bit more expensive, but I think they're worth it to have in your arsenal of feet. Also, I still have to. You're gonna have to show me how to.
I'm just gonna flop that over there. Never mind. It's closed.
That's okay.
Oh well, it works.
You're gonna have to show me how to get mine attached to my machine because I tried it, and then I just couldn't get it to like do what I wanted to do with it, and I think I just had it set up wrong. I did watch some tutorials on how to do it, and I think I just did it wrong, or I think maybe the issue I was having was I needed to do some really, really specific top stitching on it, and I needed to be able to see exactly where my stitching seam was compared to where my top, because I was being to like 1/8 of an inch accuracy, so I couldn't see that.
Gorgeous on that wasp
for miles on that. So I think that's why I took that off, because I needed to be able to see it.
Well, and for a long time I had one of these and I never wore it, and then Heather came over and she's like, do you have a walker foot? I was like, yes I do. I hate it, but here it goes. Use it if you feel like it. And what was happening is this little guy that goes like this, it was staying up, and she was like, well, that's why you hate it. It's not working. I just took a little bit of sewing machine oil, squirt, 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 wiggle, 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 and now it works just fine.
Oh, that's awesome.
So
cool.
Take care of your tools.
So what I wound up, since we're talking about vinyl and different feet that you can also use a Teflon foot for things like vinyl, or like a material that isn't like regular fabric that has some sort of like plastic top. There's a Teflon foot in there somewhere. It's that white one.
This guy.
Nope. It's the white one. Yeah. So you can't really see it. You can see it kind of up against my Yeah, you know what? I'll just post pictures, like a makeup tutorial. It's hard to really see.
These are really little things.
So yeah, these are super tiny. I'll put some pictures. I'll take some like close up videos or something of these. But a Teflon foot has a little bit more of a smoothness on the side, and it doesn't get stuck to those vinyls very well. The only thing though is that it's not see through. So like me, if you were top stitching on vinyl, this won't really work for you unless your top stitching lines up perfectly with the middle and you can see where your fabric's going. If you've got like a very clear path to follow. And I actually wound up using tape a lot.
Yeah.
Another thing that I used was painter's tape, actually, right on top of my vinyl, because I was able to use that one flat side of the painter's tape right on top, and I just sewed right down on the side of that tape because I was able to line that up with the fabric where I wanted it to go. And that worked well. And then also, the other thing you can use is this, and I forget what this is called. I think it's embroidery paper. You can tear parts of this off and throw this underneath on top of your fabric between the foot and your fabric, and that will help glide this along too. So sometimes I had to take 2 pieces of paper of this and sandwich them together, and I only had a tiny little sliver that I could see through, but I knew where I was going, so it helped keep the fabric from bulking up underneath, or from it stopping and ripping the vinyl.
The other thing with the paper is you can actually use just regular tissue paper. Just tissue paper that you would wrap a present with. And that's really helpful, not just with vinyl, but if you're using a very viscous fabric or something that's on the bias, which can really stretch and distort as you're sewing it, you can sandwich it between paper, and that will make it so that the feed dogs are gripping the paper and not stretching your fabric.
Yes.
So when I did my Nature's Prophet, there's a lot of applique, and it's applique on bias cut.
Oh my gosh. It's like the perfect storm of like...
What was that kind of fabric? Oh, well. It's very viscous, very
slippery.
Slippery. It was not going to keep its shape, but you can sandwich tissue paper, do your stitches, do your satin stitches, and then just pull the tissue paper right out.
Yeah. I think the only time that wouldn't work is if you're doing like a zigzag that is like a really tight zigzag, because then you might wind up tearing or like loosening up the zigzag stitching as you're trying to tear the tape off or the paper off.
Well,
I've run into issues with
that. That's thicker, but with actual tissue paper, that just
right.
Because actually, when you do a satin stitch with tissue paper, you are actually kind of cutting the paper as you go.
Oh, and so perforates it along the way.
Yeah, and then it just tears right off.
There's also dissolvable paper, like in what's it called? It's what you use for embroidery, or like if you're sewing something, like it's like it's for structure. So it will dissolve. I've seen it in the store. I'll find it and I'll link it. Yeah, I have never used it, so I don't know anything really about it. But if it helps provide that barrier, yeah, that'll work. So cool.
So the next foot I want to talk about is the Stitch in the Ditch foot. This is Beverly's Stitch in the Ditch foot, and I didn't bring my own, and she's bent hers.
What?
So you need to buy a new one. Look at that.
What are you talking about? I've like never used this thing.
Look at that. That's supposed to be straight.
Oh, serious?
Yeah.
I swear to God, it came this way. Can't I just bent it?
I tried. Well, we can try. But that's supposed to be straight.
Yeah, I was wondering why that was bent. All right, I'm going to have to use some tools on this thing.
Okay. So, the Stitch in the Ditch foot, like, we'll pretend the little thing in the middle is straight. It's this little guy. But the Stitch in the Ditch foot, what it essentially does is it gives you a guide where you can line your needle up so that you are sewing right along where 2 seams meet. And depending on where you put your needle on your machine, you can do on just one side of that to get a really nice clean top stitch. You can do it on the other side. Or you can go straight down the middle. That's why it's called the Stitch in the Ditch, because you're sewing right in the middle of that seam to get layers to stick together. This is so helpful when you're doing top stitching. There's another one that's actually usually used for quilters called a 1/4 inch seam.
I think I have one of those in there. It's that big long one.
What big one?
It's like a clear one.
This guy?
This one, I think.
This doesn't look like the one I use.
No.
This is different than the one I use.
Okay, well then never mind.
So the one I use essentially still has the little metal piece, except it's on the edge.
Oh,
and
okay.
so you can use that to get a nice, clean, even top stitch as well, because it gives you that guide that you can follow. You can get this little metal piece right in that seam.
That's
and
awesome.
Then just sew it right along.
Cool.
It's really great.
So those are great tips for top stitching.
And then the last one that I think I want to go over that gets used a lot is a buttonhole foot. Now, the buttonhole foot only works if you have the setting on your machine. It's not going to work on every machine. Mm-hmm. But if you've ever tried to sew a buttonhole without this, you know how hard that is. It's miserable. Nobody likes doing it.
No.
And so if you're like me and the first experience doing buttonholes was on a machine that didn't have that setting, then I avoided putting buttons in anything. I don't know, you I think did the same thing.
Oh yeah, no, and I come from the school of thought where you do zigzags, zigzag stitch, and then longer stitch, and then go backwards, or whatever.
and you have to tighten your zigzag stitch and then lengthen your. It's not fun at all. If you have a machine that has a buttonhole stitch, use it. It's not hard to use, and if you've been burned by trying to just power through buttonholes on your own, you're going to be happy that you tried this because it's so much easier.
Oh, for sure. And definitely, like, if you are experimenting with these new feet, do it on scrap fabric. Try to do it on fabric that is going to be similar to what you're going to be using it for, or using it with. Like, if you're going to be doing it on vinyl, grab those scraps out of the trash and put them in your machine. and test it out first before you start doing it, because I didn't know that thing was bent.
Yeah, that
thing
idea. Is super bent. It's not supposed to look like that.
Oh, interesting.
One thing I also want to just mention, I didn't bring mine and you don't have it, but ruffler foots are another thing. They can help with gathering and creating pleats, the tiny little pleats.
I think I do have one.
You have a ruffler?
Is that? Oh wait, no, maybe not.
No, rufflers are big.
I don't have a ruffler. Why are you asking me for one?
Okay, well, anyway, rufflers are another thing you can use that can create like a lot of those little pleats or gathers. They can do that, but they have about 1,000 settings. So what I did was I cut strips of fabric and marked 10 inches on my fabric, and then I just started feeding that through my ruffler and marking down what my settings were. Because what that does is it essentially takes your fabric and shrinks it depending on what your setting is. And so this way I know the chunk started out at 10 inches. I can measure how much it's at now, and I know what that setting is. So if I know I need to get 30 inches of fabric gathered into a 10-inch space, I know I have to find the setting that reduces things by 2.
That's a great point.
And I keep it in a little baggie.
Have a little cheat sheet. Yeah. I know we had talked about, somebody had posted, I think it was Mia, posted a cheat sheet that she uses for needles and like what needles to use for which fabrics. Yeah. I'm going to have to get her on this podcast as well so she can tell us about her tips and tricks, and maybe we'll talk about that then. But yeah, definitely find that thread on the SheProp group. I don't think I can link it on the podcast. But yeah, it's there. It's under a topic called sewing. Settings. Yep. No. Hey, before we launch into a different thing, can we talk about zipper feet?
Oh, zipper feet. Yeah.
So I have these two.
Yes, this is the one that I use. This is a pretty common one. And I use this for everything. There's a separate foot that you can use for invisible feet. I actually bought one and it didn't fit my machine for some reason, so I never used it.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. This one is similar to that, but it's not exactly. I think that my invisible zipper foot is on one of my machines right now. But I use that one a lot for top stitching as well.
Because you can. And adding piping.
Yeah.
And some feet are more expensive, like your walker foot, your ruffler foot. Those are going to cost you a little bit more, but a lot of these are less than $10.
Yeah.
So there's lots of options in here that you can really go nuts with. Just for example, I saw one in here. This is a rolled hem foot. You can get a foot that will do a fine rolled hem on things like chiffon and silk and those things that require those tiny little rolled hems.
Which is amazing.
Yes.
There's so many video tutorials out there. Make sure you find the one for your machine, because every machine's a little bit different. Yeah. But yeah, there's a ton.
On scraps.
Yeah, practice on scraps. Cool. All right. Have we beaten this subject to death?
I think we've beaten the zipper foot. So the next one, I'm going to skip to sharp scissors and cutters. It's a favorite topic of mine. Anybody who has somebody else living in their home, and if you haven't just berated into them the importance of not using your sewing scissors, get on that right away.
Yes.
My husband has actually cut fabric without the sewing scissors because he knew he wasn't allowed to touch them. I'm like, in this case, you could.
Good boy.
But good sewing scissors you cannot use on fabric. On anything other than fabric. So do not cut your foam. Do not cut your thebra, your warbler, your boning. Don't cut any of that stuff with your sewing scissors. So with what Beverly's done is she's taken 2 very good pairs of scissors. This one is her sewing scissors. And this one has a big wad of duct tape wrapped around the handle, which is your cue that you can use it. In my house, I tie ribbons around the handles of the ones that are usable, and then I write what you can use them on.
Yeah, I wrote fabric on the fabric scissors.
Oh, it's faded, but it's right there.
Yeah, I should rewrite it.
I have warbler written on a piece of ribbon, except I spelled warbler wrong, so it looks like warbler. Warbler.
Some people still spell it like that.
But in addition to some really good scissors, these are gangers. These ones are specifically for cutting patterns, and you can tell because when you lay them down, they stay flat.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so you can just cut, whereas something, I don't see a pair of other scissors.
Here, let me get into my scissor library. I don't really have other scissors, but I've got these.
Yeah, this'll be a good example, because when you go like this, the bottom lifts up too, and that can throw your pattern off. So when you go with this guy and do that, the bottom stays a lot flatter. It's great. I got a new pair of these. They're so slashy. I got a new pair of these for Christmas, and I'm very excited about it. Oh, those are the bad ones.
Yeah, make sure you don't get that mixed up.
No.
But you know what? You have to also think about, like, if you're cutting a lot of warbler, use some good scissors. Don't use crappy scissors. Like, that stuff is hard to cut. So either use sharp scissors that you're not going to use for fabric, or go ahead and you should have a set of medical scissors anyway. These guys are amazing. So you use these for cutting off duct tape dummies off of yourself. You can also
a little tip, so you're not accidentally cutting yourself with these.
They're great. They're really the only kind of scissor you should be using for that. You can also cut thermoplastics really, really well with these. Any kind of thick anything, boning, these are really diesel.
These go through boning. Yep. These go through zippers. Even the metal zippers you can cut with these suckers. Yeah. My brother is a nurse, and every time I go over to his house, I grab handfuls of these and take them.
Yeah, and these are like $10, I think.
They're free if you know my brother. And then the other thing to go over are rotary tools. Now, these are my favorite. This is how I prefer to cut out my patterns.
Hang on,
That's the cat.
Kitty. We're right here.
I'm here and say hi. Hi, Zena.
I'm going to give her a little snack. Be quiet. Keep talking.
Okay. So the rotary tools I got into when I was still quilting a lot, because you can do a straight line just like butter. It cuts through layers and layers of fabric. These are incredibly sharp. If you touch the blade, it will cut you. But it does mean that you can get a really smooth line, and it also means you don't get the little jagged edges where the tip cuts. These guys are great for bigger pieces, your skirts, your bodices, things like that. These little ones, these are designed specifically for cutting circles. So if you're going around an armhole or a neck hole or something like that, these are going to be the way that you want to do that. You can still do it with the big one. You just have more control, and you can make tighter circles with the smaller ones.
Coming back. Sorry, cat maintenance.
That's fine. That's fine. You do have to replace the blades pretty frequently on these. You can't sharpen them like you can a scissor, but the blades really aren't that expensive.
Oh, going back to scissors, how often should we be sharpening the scissors, and where do we go? How do we do it?
So I go to Montevilla Sewing Center to get my scissors sharpened. They can also do pinking shears there.
Oh, okay.
You can only sharpen pinking shears once or twice before they don't have a good cut anymore.
Oh, okay.
But I don't really have a time frame because you can usually feel the difference, and depending on how mean you are to your scissors, it really depends. You do need to trim or sharpen your warbless scissors a lot.
I gotta sharpen. I got a trip to Mount Villa coming pretty soon.
And eventually you will lose the tip because that gets sharpened off, and so it doesn't cut to the tip all the way, which is actually not a bad thing. When you're cutting with scissors, you're going to get a much smoother cut if you don't cut all the way. Yeah. If you leave it just right there before you do the next snip.
So about like half an inch.
Yeah, I mean, just don't go quite to the tip because that's how you're going to get those little jagged points where you can clearly see the scissor cuts.
Oh, just interesting.
Leave it just a little bit.
Scissor cutting techniques. You heard it here. You heard it here first.
So those are scissors. I love scissors. They're so much fun.
It's so nice to have a nice pair of scissors.
They make the best noise.
They really do.
Slashy.
Slashy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is nice. I keep my fabric scissors kind of hidden away from the rest of the fam. I love them dearly, but I would stab them with those scissors if they use them for anything else.
I had flat out come into my studio to find my husband cutting foam with a pair of my good scissors, and I was like, those aren't for you.
Did you slap them out of his hands?
Yeah. Don't slap scissors. They're very sharp. Yes. But yeah, he put them down. He now has his 2 pairs he's allowed to use.
Oh my gosh. That's so funny.
They're really sticky and gross. I should buy him some new scissors.
Yeah, you should.
From the dollar store.
There you go. Oh my God, that's so mean.
I know.
Oh, pinking shears you mentioned.
Pinking shears.
What are pinking shears?
I
have a pair
somewhere.
Yeah, I've got a pair.
Okay. Pinking shears are a great thing to use if you're not planning on finishing your seams. So if you're not going to do a French seam, or if you're not planning on double stitching, or
I don't know where they are,
serging or anything, pinking shears are the ones that have the zigzag edge. The reason you would use these is because it prevents fraying. So if you use the pinking shears to cut out your patterns, and then you can wash your garment and here we go.
Yeah, watch your fingers.
You can wash your garment. Here they are. They're kind of monsters. But you're not going to get all the frays that you would with an unfinished seam if you run it through the wash. I don't use these very often because I compulsively finish all my seams, but this is a great tool if you don't want to do that. And a lot of people who cosplay don't because it's a costume. It's not something you're going to wear a lot or run through the wash a lot.
Yeah.
But these are really great. You have to be really careful with these though, because like I said, you can only sharpen them once or twice before they lose the ability to cut.
Yeah.
So
be nice to them.
Be very nice to these. And they're expensive. These
are
really expensive.
I use them with my wasp to debulk some of the bulky seams that I had created with all of my layers of fabric, because I needed things to be flush, and I didn't want like a straight seam to be visible going down my leg. So I kind of broke up that straight seam by using the pinking shears on the edges to kind of mask that straight line.
I mean, you can also do them in a lot of cases. If you're doing like a really full skirt, you can use this to cut away some of that gathered edge that can be really bulky. I mean, there's a lot of reasons you'd want to do this, and they are good for just nice edges.
Yeah. Cool. Well, add that to your Christmas list.
Yes. These are expensive, though. If you buy these, treat them very kindly.
So what's next? I think we have time for one more thing.
I think the next one, we had some requests for book suggestions.
Yes.
So I brought a couple. These are the ones that I use when it comes to fitting. And this one is Fit for Real People. This is a Palmer and Plesh book. You may recognize Palmer and Plesh if you do a lot of sewing because like they do patterns by McCall's. This is one of them. Their patterns tend to be very basic with regards to just here's your slacks. Here's a blazer. This is a pretty basic blazer that you can make. So the design really isn't there. But what they do is they do talk you through really accurate fitting. They use a technique called paper fitting. Let me find a picture.
Meanwhile, I'm going to put my sweatshirt back on because I'm an old lady.
So if you can see there, what they do is they essentially use the paper piece from the pattern and go through and pin it all together and show you where to add paper to expand your pattern or shrink the pattern so that you get the fit before you even cut fabric. This isn't my preferred technique. I do like using mock-ups, but this is a really great guide for seeing where to adjust your pattern and how to get the fit that you want. And the reason I brought this is because they do these patterns, specifically Palmer and Plush patterns, where they actually draw the fit guides on the pattern itself. So, for example, I made this blazer and I have a very narrow back. So it has a line right there on the pattern that says, do you have a narrow back? Subtract here.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yes. So it's really great. They have guides where, are your boobs in a weird place? Here's where you adjust the dart. Or
so is it written on the pattern, like this Palmer and Plush thing that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's on the individual pattern pieces.
Well, how do you know when you're looking at the pattern on the outside? Does it say?
It
it
says
does.
right there.
Palmer and Plush.
Plush. I'm assuming that's how you pronounce
it.
it.
Pletschh.
But
that's Plush, not
see,
Palmer.
they even in the instructions.
Palmer Plush tissue fitting method.
Yeah, so
that's
even
so
in the
cool.
instructions, they actually walk you through it. So you don't even need the book. Buy the book. It's a good book, and they do good work, and we need to support local art or independent artists.
That's awesome. There's one piece that fell on the floor.
We'll get it later. But this is a great one because you can actually make your garment and kind of as you go fit it.
Yeah.
And even if you don't want the world's most basic blazer, you can still learn how to fit a blazer to you.
Yeah. Or it's a great place to start if you have a pattern and you're trying to Frankenstein it. Yeah. I think that would be a good guide to have to make sure that it fits you.
Yeah, and also,
the best.
Like, sometimes the basics, that gives you an opportunity to do some really interesting design stuff. I use this pattern to make my Slytherin blazer, which is very cool. My other book that I use is The Complete Photo Guide to Perfect Fitting. This uses more of my technique, which is mock-ups. It's based around doing muslin mock-ups. But if you want to learn things like if you put on your muslin and you have a pucker here or the seam isn't sitting right, it really talks about if you see a pucker in this place, what does that mean? Does that mean you need more room in the bust? Does that mean you need more room in the shoulder, less room in the shoulder? It walks you through what you see about your garment that's not fitting correctly and how to fix it. So that's one that I really like for that.
That's awesome. I need this book. Awesome. Yeah, I'll put some links in the description for where to find this on the YouTube because I can't do it on the audio, the podcast version. So definitely come check out the YouTube for those links. This is really awesome. Looks like there's a lot in here.
There's a lot. These are some. There's a lot to go through. But you can see here they are fitting the paper to the person. Also, these are really great because this is fit for real people, and it will show you a lineup of all of these people have a size 12 dress pattern, and none of them have the same body.
Yeah.
So we all are dealing with these fit issues.
Yeah.
And the more you sew, the more you're going to realize what kind of tweaks you need to make to patterns. I know, for example, like I said, I have a very narrow back. So that's always an adjustment I need to make. Mm-hmm. And so I can just go into a pattern knowing that that's something I need to plan for.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I'm also short-waisted. I have to make everything petite because I'm not tall. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
That's
something that was a big question on there. We're going to talk more about that on future podcasts. There's just no way that we can cover everything on one. But thank you so much. This has been really informative.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah,
I like getting to go through these. Anytime I get to talk about sewing scissors and how sharp and fun they are to make the slashy noise, I will do it.
Slashy.
It also, like, if there was ever somebody breaking into my house, the first thing I would do is run into my studio because,
no doubt,
like, weapons galore. I'm gonna start defending myself with sewing scissors.
I was just watching a movie last night, and some guy stabbed another person with scissors. And I don't, honestly, why would that person leave those scissors, like, just hanging around like that?
No, you can't do that.
They were, like, in a kitchen. Those scissors do not belong in a kitchen.
No. The other one is Dial M for Murder. Scissors are the weapon, which is also a really great film if you like Hitchcock, which I do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much. If you have more questions, please come find us on the SheProp group. Or if you are watching the YouTube video and you're not a SheProp member, you can just drop a question in the description, and we'll do our best to answer those. as best we can. And if I don't know the answer, I'll ask Abby.
And if I don't know the answer, I'm going to ask my friend Karen.
Yes. Oh, she is the mistress of seams.
I'm a good sewer. I'm not Karen good. Karen is
it's amazing.
Next level.
She's amazing. So we'll have to get her on here too. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And Abby, where can we find you online?
I am online on Facebook at Abby Cat Cosplay, and I'm on Instagram at AbbyCat Cosplay as well.
All right. Well, thanks so much for tuning in, you guys. Please rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. And again, I'm Beverly from Downen Creative Studios, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Oh my God. Let's make ugly faces. This is my husband's favorite one.
Well, it was a